Welcome to At the Coolidge, a show broadcast or webcast from the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline, Massachusetts. And I'm speaking with Martin Norman, who's doing a series here called The Sound of Silence, where they present great silent films with accompaniment. And the first one coming up will be the great Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney. Yes, Marty, that's what you have coming up on Monday.
Yes, and it's one of the all-time great classic films that continue to thrill and chill audiences whenever they see it.
So before we talk about silent film in general, what you're doing with this film is remarkable. You've got one of the best accompanists in the country, piano player, and you've got a soprano coming in to do the soprano parts at the opera. Which
makes it extra special. Our piano player, if you will, which is probably doing an injustice to the extent of this man's great talent, Marty Marks, who's on the faculty at MIT and has been playing piano scores that he has written and devised himself all around the country and all around the world. And
I have seen it at the Harvard Film Archives.
That's right.
Metropolis, I think.
Yep. He's done many films, and actually he's curated a fantastic series of silent films for the Treasures of the American Film Archives, multiple DVDs that he has either played all the scores or he's gotten other people to play the score. So this is a man who's extremely talented, and he's going to be playing his score for Phantom of the Opera this coming Monday night. And he's bringing along with him a colleague from MIT, a woman who has been an outstanding soprano, who has sung in many different places and many different awards, and has been on the Tanglewood Festival chorus, member of that. And she's going to be here to sing parts of The Phantom that will highlight this silent film in a way that I think will be very, very memorable. Yeah, I think some people who aren't familiar with silent films don't know the extent to which a musician has to match the emotion and the drama and what an amazing job it is, and only certain people are really good at doing this, and he's one of them. To watch him work is an amazing experience. Besides the film, just watching him watch the film and play the score is really something else. Well, I think everybody we've had Marty here for some previous films at the Coolidge, and I think our response from the audience has been outstanding. People have come up and asked him when is he coming back, and there's been standing ovations, and we just encourage everybody to come and see for themselves. But again, it also highlights something that's very, very basic about silent films, and that is that they really have never been silent, and that music accompaniment has always been the critical element that has always been part of the silent cinema. Right, sometimes with piano players, sometimes with orchestras. Sometimes with piano players, sometimes with orchestra, organ. You know, some of the more contemporary groups use a lot of more avant-garde sounds. Percussion electronics. So people have been, there's been very periodically we see kind of a rebirth of this whole process, but people have never lost touch with the wonders of the silent cinema and how can we update it to make it more interesting and accessible to a current contemporary audience. And when they don't go, they miss some of these incredible faces. As Gloria Swanson said, it used to be great faces, I think she said. And I was thinking, just the list that comes to mind besides, you know, Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, which a lot of people think of when they think of silent films, maybe of a younger generation. I mean, my particular favorites are Lon Chaney and Clara Bow, who are just remarkable actors. And, and Lon Chaney, who was going to be in the Phantom of the Opera, the way he contorted himself for these parts, taking his, you know, pretending to be legless, or putting pins in his nose for Phantom of the Opera, or the hunch for Hunchback of Notre Dame. These are great achievements in acting as well. Well, I think that in the case of Lon Chaney, he really made it his life's work to kind of contort and distort his body in any way that would enhance the role that he was particularly playing. And as you know, that along with the Phantom films like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and other films that Chaney is famous for, he devised his own way of making himself up which I think remains unrivaled to this very day. And people who write about it say that they don't know how he suffered the pain that he suffered in order to get himself to look the way he does. And I think probably the most significant reaction is, if people see this film today, here we are, and this film is 1925, so, you know, if you do the math, that's a lot of years, and yet it holds up, mainly because of Chaney's performance. I think that film scholars will tell you that it's not the greatest horror film of all time. It's a very good film, but what puts it into the unforgettable category is the Chaney performance. And going back to the time that the film was first released in the 20s, there was a lot of discussion at that time that people, when they finally saw what becomes that critical unmasking scene,
taking it off from behind,
when
and then
she
turning
pulls
around with the face.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and
yeah.
people are just shocked, whether this is apocryphal or not. Apparently, it's been said that people fainted because they were just unprepared for what this became kind of a very skull-like image of face without a nose, eyes that are sunken, and all the other things.
And as I understand, a lot of that, the impulse for that kind of character comes from World War I, where people's faces were destroyed, and there was a whole society of masked, wealthy young men who had fought in World War I, whose faces were destroyed, their lives were saved, but they wore masks.
Well, I'm sure
that's one of the.
Yeah. I'm sure that had some impact on Chaney.
But this idea of the faces, you know, I'm looking at Rudolph Valentino, Louise Brooks, Gloria Swanson, Douglas Fairbanks.
Yep.
And to see the way they act, this particular style, the big screen really works for that, because you see the subtleties which you don't see if you're watching it maybe on a plasma screen. But there's
That's
something
right.
about seeing this on a big screen.
Seeing it on the big screen, and I think that as you pointed out before, many of these people, the people who have endured over time, were just superb actors and actresses in their own right. One of the issues that many people will notice when they see silent cinema is that sometimes in some of the films there's a lot of exaggerated responses because they were trying to compensate and make up for the fact that there was no way of using your voice.
And maybe they're coming from theater as well.
And they're coming from theater as well. But many of these people, like Fairbanks and Bow and some of the other people who have endured over time, you really see that these are people who use subtlety as well as wide expression. And the camera kind of gives you a sense that how the way they use their face and the way they use their body, sometimes you don't even need words.
And there's seminal character types too. I mean, the horror film actor, the ingenue, the vamp. I mean,
Yep.
I think a lot of actors that I know go back to those silent stars because they invented a lot of this. And the silent films invented a lot of these genres as well.
They have, and I think many people will also tell you that what went on in the silent era, and I think a lot of people will tell, you know, the first reaction is, oh, the silent era, that's way back then. That's when the movies were primitive. But I think if you take a closer look at some of these really great films that have stood the test of time, you'll find out that most of the language of the cinema really occurred back in those early days, and it has been refined and it has been further developed. But the basic language of the cinema was there, and by the time the silent films hit their golden era in the 20s especially, even though we know that the early teens and the first part of the century when D.W. Griffith was just beginning to do his seminal work, by the time we got into the 20s, the great artists who were performing at that time had really made a cinema that really stands the test of time, and it's all there. So.